just to give your staff a heads up, I plan on asking some follow-up questions on the farm tax credit, and then moving on to musical and theater production tax credit and film tax credit. But first, I'd like to just ask a couple of overall, as we take up what is a revenue bill, and I can't help but notice that in the title of this it says which are necessary to implement the state fiscal plan. And with a check on my watch at 10:27, through you, Mr. Speaker, do we have a state fiscal plan?
Not as of yet.
So earlier, for the record, you said 220 billion ish was where we were at. I don't know if you're aware, but right across the hallway here is where the Senate chamber is, and the finance chair down there said 221 billion. So in the past few hours, we've spent another $1 billion, which is an interesting problem for us to tackle. I just didn't know if you had any comment on the state's fiscal plan or how it may be evolving as we debate this revenue bill.
I don't think that there's a final number, so I can't speak to what my counterpart in the Senate said.
That's fair. On the farm tax credit, and not to take away from any of the debate that's already been there, you mentioned farmers are going to be reporting directly to agriculture and markets on the laborers on their farms specifically for this. Is that reporting going to be? I'll let you confirm.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that reporting going to be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly to align with the tax credit they'll be receiving in advance? How does that get reported to Ag and Markets?
They'll probably be reporting the first half of the year in order to qualify for the advance payment. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you now what the time frame is, whether it's quarterly, weekly. So, yes, my understanding is they report once for the advance credit, and then they would be filing their tax return for the refundable overtime tax credit.
So if they're filing for an advance, is it just based on their projection for what their labor is going to be? How does that work? Is it for the last year?
It would be based on the first half of that year's actual costs.
Okay, and then the reporting would continue twice a year from then on?
They would be reporting to the Department of Ag's. Markets would certify.
Yeah, I understand that they'd be reporting to the Department of Ag and Markets. My question is really, and here's the purpose of this question, as you can imagine and appreciate through you, Mr. Speaker. Small farms already struggle meeting a lot of the demands of regulations in New York State. Having them report, whether it be daily, hourly, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever the case may be, can have a really big impact on the paperwork that a farmer has to do, in addition to everything else that they have to do to manage a farm.
But, well, we try keeping it as simple as possible, and they have to record their payroll. I mean, they want to be able to take off their business expenses, to the extent.
Certainly they would. Does Ag and Markets have the staff to be able to execute something like this? I know a former questioner asked if this was going to be in the Department of Labor, which would seem as though they've done this kind of thing. Does Ag and Markets have any experience in this? Do they have the staff to handle it?
The executive has said that they have the ability, that Ag has the ability to do this, so we assume that they do.
Okay. Will this tax credit be necessary if the threshold of 60 hours of overtime stays put?
It probably wouldn't take effect, but it would be, so it might not be necessary to be taken advantage of.
Right, so this tax credit would only be available if the Labor Wage Board and the governor decide to lower the income threshold or the overtime threshold below 60 hours. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to the New York City musical and theatrical production tax credit. Through you, Mr. Speaker, they did they use the 100 million in tax credit that we awarded last year? Did all of that 100 million get used up in New York City for this musical and theatrical production tax credit?
No, they haven't, because I think when the Omicron variant hit, that many productions that had either started, had to close down, or had planned to start delayed the start, so that there was additional dollars that weren't spent.
Okay, so this is a revenue bill. This is a reduction in revenue by $100 million that we're adding in by way of tax credit. Does some of the money from last year or that tax credit roll over, or is the full pot 100 million here for that tax credit?
Well, it's 200 total. My understanding is there is about 20 million left, 21 million left of last year's that wasn't claimed.
So
that will roll over and be available in addition to the 100 million.
So the full tax credit here would be somewhere around $121 million. And
Yes.
Thank you. And last year we included upstate theaters. Additionally, in the Assembly One House bill that was voted on in this chamber, we also included those upstate theaters and musical groups. Who at the negotiating table decided that this should only be for New York City and that upstate should be eliminated?
There still remains additional funds that were not applied for upstate. You're correct that we had in the Assembly had wanted to expand that credit, but we were not ultimately successful. And my understanding is that there's a substantial amount of those funds that are still available that were not there were not applications submitted for them.
Well, you don't have to tell me whether it was the governor or the Senate that decided that it wasn't a priority and that they only wanted to prioritize New York City. I can appreciate that, but I also appreciate that at least in this chamber, the One House budget resolution that brought forward didn't disinclude upstate New York theaters and musical groups. My understanding here is that if the production tax credit is collected, but the musical or theatrical production does so well that they greater than double the revenue over the prior year, that they have to pay half of that credit back. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
And where does that half of the credit that they have to pay back go?
It'll go to the Council of the Arts Cultural Program funding.
Okay, so the Council of Arts Cultural Program funding has existed for a while. How much is in that pot? Or actually, here's a good question. How much has gotten kicked back historically for someone who more than doubled their production over the prior year?
Since this is a new credit, I can't answer that.
Okay,
question.
So we don't have an example.
We don't have any history to show.
Understood. Of the Council of the Arts, because obviously I have a concern with the direction this policy has gone for upstate New York. Of the Council of the Arts funding that's been available, is there a breakdown between upstate music and theater groups that have taken advantage of that fund versus New York City?
That's not part of this bill, but I believe that there is at some point some sort of per capita. Some portion of it is per capita, but I couldn't at this moment tell you.
Okay.
What that is.
And I'd move along to the film tax credit. Through you, Mr. Speaker, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Sure.
So it appears to me, after the executive budget proposal, that the language that we've included here for the film tax credit mirrors the executive budget proposal and that of prior years. Is that correct?
We have added we've increased diversity requirements.
Okay, so there has been a change. The amount of reduced revenue, because this is a revenue bill, so a tax credit is a reduction in revenue. The amount here is still 420 million, as it has been in past years. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
And when we approve this $420 million tax credit for films or TV productions that are made in New York State, does it all get used up? Was it used up in prior years? How much of it gets used?
My understanding is that it all gets used up.
So all $420 million of it.
Correct.
Pete?
I couldn't tell you if there was. We don't know yet. I guess if there was some during COVID, if there's been any reduction because of the reduction in productions that may have taken place, but certainly in the past, it's always been used.
And the governor's office for motion picture and television development, that propaganda team is now going to decide who's eligible based on what here? What's the new criteria?
They just have to file a diversity plan and then show that they, in fact, are following it.
How much of the film tax credit has been used in upstate New York in the past? Do we have any kind of idea there?
We don't have that breakdown. We'd have to do some checking.
Fair. Thank you for your time, Mr.
Sure.
Speaker. I would go on the bill.
On the bill, sir.
What this bill is supposed to do is provide revenue for New York State, i.e. the taxing plan, in order to pay for a budget that we don't know what the price tag is yet. In this House a few hours ago, we said it was somewhere around $220 billion. And then a little while ago in the Senate, as this budget gets debated, is continually debated behind closed doors and negotiated behind closed doors, the Senate said 221 billion-ish. It's impossible to, in good faith, have a revenue bill if you don't know what the spending plan is. It even says necessary to implement the state's fiscal plan, which nobody in this chamber can tell us what that fiscal plan entails. What else does it have? It has some nice things. It has a lot of tax cuts in it, which is impressive. But if we don't know what the fiscal plan is, how can we decide where we can cut taxes and what the revenue bill should actually look like? It's a good question. What else does this revenue bill include? Well, it includes $420 million in the discretion of the governor's propaganda office. It includes a $100 million bailout for New York City only theaters. It sells out farmers based on the overtime threshold. It enhances star property tax relief for New York City, but not for seniors living on a fixed income. It takes assessment authority away from localities so that the state can decide exactly how much your solar panels in your town are going to be worth on their tax rolls. And this is supposed to be a revenue bill. We don't have a budget. We don't have a financial plan. And Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no.